Look, I'll just say it. Shonen anime just hasn't been hitting lately. When I was an anime newbie, it was all fresh and exciting, but I think that time has run its course and now it all feels kind of samey and formulaic. For the little shonen anime I do watch nowadays, most of them I can barely remember them in a week. But of course, there are still shonen out there that break the mold, and one of the main anime that introduced me to the medium was of course Jujutsu Kaisen. 3 years ago. Yes, let that sink in. 3 years. With that amount of time, it was pretty easy for me to forget a whole lot, and while watching season 2, I could recall moments and events, but not enough to give me a full grasp of the show. So I went back to season 1, now as a seasoned veteran of anime who barely watches it anymore, and I wanted to see if it held up. And to my surprise, it actually exceeded my expectations. A lot of people do just write off Jujutsu Kaisen as just another shonen, and yes, it technically is another shonen, but to my surprise, it shakes up a lot as well. This is all coupled with Mappa's excellent animation, but I think anyone with a pair of eyes can see that. Instead, I want to bring some more love to the story and the characters of Jujutsu Kaisen in this video. So with Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2 wrapping up, maybe, probably, I should get a fucking schedule. So with Season 2 happening, let's take a look back at the first season. If you want an in-depth look into Season 1 or just want a recap, then stick around as we dive into Jujutsu Kaisen Season 1. Okay, ignoring the obligatory vague opening, we are first introduced to Itadori Yuji being a high school boy doing high school things. Now, Yuji on the outside seems like your average shonen protagonist with nothing unique or special about him. He's kind and caring of others, he's airheaded and a little dumb, and he's very strong off the bat. He seems like your boring run-of-the-mill protagonist. But that wasn't the feeling I got from him when I was watching this show. Something about him felt a little different, and it took me a while to pinpoint what that was. But in my eyes, Yuji takes all the traits of your average shonen protagonist and just dials them down a little to make him stand out. The most prominent feature being his righteousness and need to save people doesn't stem from this idea that he needs to be a hero and embark on a great quest or something. Rather, it stems from two things. One is just genuine kindness, and he helps people not because he feels like he needs to, but because he simply wants to. In fact, the quest that he chose to go on wasn't exactly much of a choice, but we'll talk about that later. The second is obviously his grandpa's dying words, simply stating to help people. They're very simple words, but those words impact everything Yuji does going forward. Every action he takes is in order to enact what his grandpa wanted him to do, for how vague they were. And he isn't completely lobotomized like Dragon Ball Super Goku is. All this in my opinion makes him seem much more relatable than most other shonen protagonists. Well, except for the super strength thing of course. But aside from him, we have Fushiguro, who he's around sneaking about trying to find a cursed object. Once again, Fushiguro fills the role of another trope common in shonen anime, being the more edgy guy. Only this time he isn't super OP yet, but we'll also get to that later. Honestly, out of 3 main characters, I'm sorry to say that Fushiguro is definitely my least favorite. He kinda feels dry and boring most of the time. The show does put that to good use to make some pretty funny interactions, and he does have his moments later, but for now he just didn't grasp me like the other characters will. Well anyway, while he's off moping about somewhere, we see Eugene hang out with his friends in the occult club, which is suspiciously similar to the telepathy club from Mob Psycho, before he has to throw some balls around to assert his dominance. Fushiguro sniffs out the cursed object on Yuji, but Yuji has to rush her to the hospital to see his grandpa. There he tells Yuji to help people before fucking dying. If it seems like a lot of stuff is happening and not a lot of time, it's because you're exactly right. The show's pacing is incredibly fast, which makes sure that my Gen Z Zoomer brain doesn't need any Subway Surfers gameplay to watch this show. But it can have some jarring results, as in the first episode, we just had Yuji digging around at school before jumping straight into his grandpa fucking dying. Yuji takes his death like an absolute champ before being confronted by Fushiguro about the object, to which he tells him that he left it with the occult members who were at the school. Turns out the cursed object has a seal around it, making it ward off curses. But if someone were to take the seal off, then it would do the exact opposite. So cut to the school where it's an epic, scary 3 AM unboxing video gone wrong, gone sexual. Fushiguro and Yuji rush over to school, and once they get there, Fushiguro tells Yuji to stay behind. But with the words of his grandpa still fresh in his mind, he goes in anyway. In the school, we see the curse doing unspeakable things to the poor high school student. Yuji, not a fan of pedophiles, saves her and starts throwing down with the curse, with Fushiguro trying to support. I think it's a good time to mention that Fushiguro himself doesn't throw hands too much, mainly because he uses Shikigami to do the attacking for him. basically making him a pseudo Pokemon trainer. The petal curse goes down without a hitch and they're able to recover the finger. Fushiguro tells Yuji that it's the finger of Ryomen Sukuna and curses when to eat it to gain power, just before another comes to try and do just that. And before we move on, I just have to mention this. Are they using the Dark Souls parry sound?
Aye.
Well, anyway, this curse turns out to be a bit more than they can chew, so Yuji decides to chew on some fingers. That sounded better in my head. But eating the finger caused Ryomen Sukuna to be reborn again, to which he kills the curse and goes on an obligatory evil villain speech about killing everyone, but it's rudely interrupted by Yuji telling him to get out of his head, with Fushiguro being a little baby instead of thinking, wow, that was so cool. He said, you just brought back the king, the curse is gonna kill us all, or something stupid like that. But then, the legend himself shows up, Gojo Satoru. And he actually has some humor in him. You see, everyone loves Gojo. He's funny, chill, and most importantly, ridiculously OP. Now for how cool it is to see really badass characters fuck shit up, there comes a downside of why can't he just do everything. Luckily for us, JJK has some unique ways to nerf him, but for now he can just fuck around and not find out, as he literally asked Yuji to bring out the super crazy powerful curse from 10 seconds ago. And once Sukuna is out, he gets absolutely schooled by Gojo. Sukuna literally commits domestic terrorism in the high school, and Gojo is just still standing there. Well, luckily for everyone, Yuji can control Sukuna, and Gojo, delighted by the news, puts Yuji to sleep, and bam! We're back at our obligatory vague intro. One thing I gotta point out is, I get that normal people can't see curses, but how do people not have at least a vague idea that something is going on when shit like this happens? Like, what's the explanation gonna be? Lab experiment gone wrong? Anyway, it's revealed that Yuji is going to be executed, because Sukuna's fingers can't be destroyed by conventional means. But if they were to kill Yuji after he ate a finger, that would destroy the fingers he ate as well. And the higher ups in the Jujutsu world are very scared of Sukuna, so they don't want any risk and want Yuji dead as soon as possible. However, Gojo proposes another option, which is Yuji can go and help get all 20 Sukuna fingers, eat them, and then get killed, which aren't exactly two of the most appealing choices. This is why I said Yuji isn't embarking on this quest strictly out of the kindness of his heart, but in reality he didn't really have much of a choice. Coupled with the fact that he knows that getting all the fingers will help save people, then it's not really an option. But of course going on this adventure will leave some scars, and one thing that really stood out was how visually striking this show can be. When Gojo is describing the horror Yuji will face like,
"You're gonna be brutally molested by 16 autistic clowns."
There is usually a pretty good visual representation of what he's talking about. But with his new goal in mind, he has to go to Jujutsu High and meet the principal. There his resolve is tested by battling a teddy bear while having to come up with a good reason for him to be there. In the end, he tells about how even if he were able to run away, the guilt he would feel for the potential of people dying because of him awakening Sukuna's power would be too great. This response I think adds to what I'm saying when I say that Yuji isn't overly righteous to the point of being zealous in a way. Yes, this is very noble, but also a little selfish. The emphasis is not on the fact that people are dying, but more so on the fact that his guilt will be too great to handle. It does feel like he's being noble and trying to be a hero, but it just as much feels like he is taking a responsibility. Responsibility for actions he didn't quite fully understand and is now trying to make things right. But I also want to point out that the voice actor for the principal is Takeya Kuroda, the same voice as Kazuma Kiryu. So yeah, that's kinda cool. Well anyway, Yuji passes and he's put in the dorm next to Fushiguro before we go off to Tokyo to meet our final part of the trio, Kugisaki Noboru. Not gonna lie, I didn't think I was gonna like Kugisaki when I first saw her. I thought she was gonna be the bitchy, annoying villain for the female lead, but that couldn't be further from the truth as we will eventually see. But what I did know I was gonna like was the banter between the cast. They are made to perfectly complement each other, leading to some really funny interactions. So good in fact that at the end of every episode we get a little slice of life kind of short called Jujutsu Sample. I'm not gonna talk about them individually, but just know that they all slap, and are definitely worth watching if you didn't. Except for this one, I didn't know what the fuck was going on. Well anyway, Kugisaki immediately takes a disliking to Yuji and Fushiguro, but when her and Yuji are on the same page, they are 100% on the same page. Can't say the same about Fushiguro though, but that's just who he is. Their introductions are short-lived, that they are then taken to an abandoned building where Yuji and Kugisaki have to prove their strengths by exercising the curses in there. Here we learn Kugisaki's ability and backstory. She uses a hammer and nails at a long range distance by cursing the nails and hitting them to fire at her opponents. Her special ability is the ability to use a severed body part of her enemy as essentially a voodoo doll. This, along with Yuji's running through walls, quickly deals with the curses. Immediately after this, we're given Kugisaki's backstory, which is just kind of randomly thrown in here. The main gist is that while she was living in the countryside, someone named Sayuri came out to live in the countryside with her, and she was super nice, but everyone hated her because she was from the city. So she left, and thus Kugisaki wanted to come to the city to find her. I honestly can't say if this is good or bad, as even with the hindsight of finishing the season, it just never comes up again. I don't know, maybe it comes up in season 2, but anyway, the day is saved and our heroes can go have sushi on a bullet train. But at a juvenile detention center, a cursed version of the baby from Death Stranding appears and our heroes are sent to go stop it. When they arrive, this guy, who I forgot his name, informs them that there's a potential for a special grade curse to be there, which means super not good. However, Yuji is weirdly oblivious to all of this, like he was sent there with absolutely no preparations whatsoever. Makes you think a little. Well, anyway, Mr. Glasses Guy tells them that their main priority should be saving people, and right on cue, some lady starts crying about her son. So our heroes go in to save people, but are immediately trapped. But don't worry, as Fushiguro has some good boys, they remember to send the entrance. Well, not too long after adventuring through the cursed area, they find the son, and I don't think he made it. Well, Yuji, being the good Samaritan he is, still wants to bring the body back, which I don't know if he would want to show that to a worried mother, but Fushiguro still has some objections, citing that the son is not exactly the nicest person. The two then get into an argument about saving everyone, because not everyone is a good person, something that Fushiguro strongly believes, saying, "What if the person you saves end up killing someone later?" To which Yuji responds with, "Then why did you save me?" Initially, I felt this conversation was out of left field, but after finishing the season, this conversation is the basis of many of the questions proposed in the season. The idea of saving everyone, and is it really an achievable or even a moral goal to have? But our philosophical debate is cut short as Kugisaki is sent to the back rooms and the good boy dies. Moment of silence for the good boy. But immediately after that, we get jump scared by the curse. With their timbers effectively shivered by the awesome looking curse, the two see that this thing is way too powerful for them. So Yuji chooses to stay behind and hold on until Fushiguro finds Kugisaki and gets the fuck out. Once they're out, Yuji will switch with Sukuna. However, Yuji, already having lost his hand and fingertips, starts to break down and really doubts himself. It's a complete departure from the more calm and chill Yuji we knew, which I think does a great job of humanizing him. He ends up channeling some of those negative emotions into one punch, but then he hears a signal and Sukuna taps in. And when Sukuna comes out, it's immediately clear that this guy is just on a whole nother level. Just his presence is so fucking intimidating, and it's clear that this curse is nothing but a little toy for him. So he does just that, fucking tortures him and then finally puts him out of his misery like an absolute maniac. And after his little fun times are over, he waits for Yuji to come back. But after he doesn't, he simply pulls out the most diabolical smile, and god, I love this smile. It is perfect visual storytelling. A lot of other anime would have an inner head monologue or something with Yuji going, "Oh no, why can't I come back?" But Jujutsu Kaisen cuts straight to the chase and tells you everything you need to know with one simple smile. Well anyway, Kugisaki gets sent home and Fushiguro waits for Yuji to come back, only for it to be Sukuna instead. Sukuna, being the absolute menace he is, fucking rips out Yuji's heart as hostage. But it doesn't really matter much as Fushiguro ends up getting bodied by Sukuna. But at the end of the fight, Sukuna does show interest in Fushiguro as he apparently has a lot of potential. We didn't get insight into his backstory a little with a girl named Sumiki, who will be important later, and his morality, which is that only good people should be saved. But before Fushiguro and Sukuna finish their battle, Fushiguro answers Yuji's question on why he saved him, simply stating that he was a good person and he doesn't regret it one bit. This prompts Yuji to come back. It's fitting considering the difference between Fushigiro's first encounter with Sukuna inside of Yuji being one of complete hostility, and their second and supposed final encounter, he acknowledges the fact that Yuji is still in there. Well, Yuji then fucking dies, and Fushiguro and Kugisaki try to not seem like they care much, but deep down, yeah, they're sad. But then we get introduced to the second years of Jujutsu High, and there are immediately some glaring qualities that make them stand out. One thing I think specifically Japanese media tends to get really down is that you don't necessarily need characters to be deep or have a lot going on for the audience to find an interest in them. Sometimes all you need is for them to be a little quirky. In the second years, we have one guy that can only talk about balls and the other is a fucking Po from Kung Fu Panda. These little quirks allow the audience to take an interest in their characters without having to overload us with all their problems. I honestly could make a whole video about this, but I'll save that for later. The only one who doesn't have an immediate interesting trait is Maki, but she is a very interesting character once you get into it. But moving on, they drop subtle hints about the Tokyo and Kyoto sister school exchange, god that was a fucking mouthful, which will be a big arc in this season. I know a lot of people like to say that season 1 is just a setup season, but if that's the case, then this is one jam-packed setup. Even with 24 episodes, a lot of stuff happens. But anyway, while this is happening, we learn that this was all a setup to kill Yuji, planned by the higher-ups, and Gojo is not too happy about that. In fact, he is never really happy up with the higher-ups, and there's a common thread throughout the season. One thing that I find really funny is that Gojo explicitly states that he could just kill all the higher-ups if he really wanted to, but doesn't because it wouldn't actually change anything. So if you guys think Gojo is soft, then think again, because this guy literally gives zero fucks. But deep inside Yuji, Sukuna and Yuji are having a little discussion. Sukuna wants to make a pact that if he says the word maintain, Yuji has to hand over his body for a little while. He also promises that he won't kill anyone while he's taken over, but Yuji still doesn't like this and enters a fight to the death with Sukuna, with the winner getting his way, to which Yuji gets absolutely obliterated. I haven't mentioned it yet, but I love the thing they got between the two with Sukuna being deep inside of Yuji. I should probably think about my word choice. Sukuna's motives are really unclear, with the only clue being that it has something to do with Fushiguro. Throughout the show, there is a small amount of uncertainty on what Sukuna plans to do and whether or not he will come out. Although it doesn't really have any effect on this season, I'm sure the following seasons it will. Well anyway, Yuji gets revived and he has a little bro moment with Gojo. After this, Gojo decides to keep Yuji dead in the records in order to train him to prepare himself when the higher-ups eventually come after him again. A lot of people think Gojo is nerfed because he's dumb, but that really couldn't be further from the truth. Although he doesn't act like it, Gojo is extremely smart, and his fight with the higher-ups is all a mental game of chess, and Gojo knows exactly how to play his pieces. So Yuji ends up undergoing his training and actually learns how cursed energy works. Not gonna lie, the way Gojo explained how cursed energy worked with his analogy with electricity made a fuck ton of sense. Basically, every Jujutsu sorcerer has to generate raw cursed energy in order to get their power. However, the way they use that energy depends on the type of technique they use. It's intentionally vague to open up the doors for the techniques to be basically whatever they want. Unfortunately for Yuji, the sorcerer's techniques have to be etched into their bodies. Although we do get hinted that Sukuna's techniques may get etched into Yuji's body later down the line. But for now, Yuji just has to imbue his cursed energy into his hands. And as we already know, he is really good at throwing hands. So his first rigorous, intense training exercise is to watch movies. Man, I really wish I was a Jujutsu sorcerer. But more specifically, he has to output a set amount of cursed energy into a stuffed teddy bear or else it will punch him in the face. Almost like a weird cursed version of FNAF. While all this is happening, the other two goobers are also training. Kugasaki trains by reenacting the Bowser fight in Super Mario 64, while Fushiguro has an existential crisis about his morality while also trying to figure out how to stay strapped. While all that is happening, we get the first glimpse of the Goon Squad as they discuss their evil plans to take over the world. A main point of interest becomes Gojo, and a majority of the villains are smart enough to say, yeah, let's not fuck with that guy. Except for the Cyclops looking ass, he wants to smoke. Pun not intended. And when everyone tells him, yeah, that's not a good idea, he gets a little heated. Pun definitely intended. Later in the day, Gojo gets ambushed by Mr. Volcano Guy. By now you probably would have guessed that this is going to be another absolute ass whooping. I mean, Gojo could have bent him over either way and still had his fun. And so far there have been a lot of one-sided fights in the show, but they all have been great at building character. Both Sukuna and Gojo have had theirs, but they have been very different. For Sukuna, you get the feeling he is there to absolutely humiliate his opponent and insert himself as a based Sigma male. Gojo on the other hand is much more playful, even giving insight to what he's doing. Not to say he isn't disrespectful, I mean he literally paused his fight just to bring Yuji there to school him. Like if that isn't cold as fuck, then I don't know what is. But Volcano Guy is not taking the disrespect, and pulls out basically his ultimate move in the show, Domain Expansion. The main focus is that it puts you into another universe in which the user is guaranteed a hit. I think domain expansions are really cool, as they can basically be whatever you want, thus they feel all very personal to each character, on top of them just being really cool to look at. It seems Yuji and Gojo are in a bit of a pickle, but then Gojo takes off his blindfold, which is the exact same time that all the ladies, or anyone who is sexually attracted to men, immediately fell in love. Which is not me. But you gotta be honest, this guy could simply rizz you up just by looking at you. It don't matter that he dressed like William Afton, he will still pull infinitely more than you. Speaking of infinite, the only way to counter a domain expansion is to use your own domain expansion that is bigger and better than the other. So Gojo wins the dick measuring contest with his domain expansion, Infinite Void. And Volcano Guy is just flabbergasted. I mean, he looks like he just got the answer to the universe and how to make an atomic bomb. Well anyway, Gojo's a little too hard on his neck massage, but before he can interrogate Volcano Guy, another curse swoops in to save him. Now, the young and curious ones watching this for the first time may think, wait, if that was a special grade curse, then what more is there to fight? How will the power scaling work in this show if we've already seen some of the most powerful curses? It was certainly a question I was thinking about when I first watched the show, but fear not, as our young curious minds will be relieved in this very episode. We get more info about Gojo's little battle with the higher-ups, and apparently the principal of the Kyoto school is one of these old guys. But while that is happening, Fushiguro and Kugisaki are confronted by two very important characters, Mai and the main man himself, Todo. They're both students from Kyoto, so they have a little beef with the Tokyo students. Then Todo asks Fushiguro what kind of women he's into. And of course, baby bitch boy Fushiguro says something like, as long as she has an indomitable spirit or something. But then Todo says nuh-uh and fucking slams him. Immediately both Todo and Maya reveal themselves to be the two of the strongest characters in the entire show. Todo hits Fushiguro with a textbook suplex that would make even Leon Kennedy nervous, and has a pretty good boxing stance. Mai, on the other hand, just uses a Smith & Wesson, like no joke, just a Dirty Harry style 44. I guess you guys probably don't know who that is, so maybe Rick Grimes? Actually Rick Grimes uses a Colt Python, which is actually chambered in 357, which is completely different from the 44. Thanks, Hickok 45. Anyway, the scuffle between the two lasts for a little bit before the second years come to stop it. We also learn that Mai is Maki's sister. They got some beef with each other stemming from their clan, and we'll learn about that later as well. So the fight ends and they both leave so that Todo can develop a parasocial relationship with an idol, but not before Kugisaki gets a pretty decent rear naked choke on Mai. Afterwards, it's revealed that Maki doesn't actually have any cursed powers, and even needs glasses to see the curses in the first place. While all of this is happening, Gojo ends up confronting the principal where they discuss the political state of the Jujutsu world. We also get our answer to the power scaling, as Gojo states that the power levels of modern curses and curse users is rapidly increasing, so boom, so problem solved. But none of that matters because we get our first look at one of the best characters in the entire fucking show, Miwa. I mean, how could you not love her? She's adorable. Her little crush on Gojo, how she's super sweet to everyone, and just everything about her is just so cute. And if anything happened to her, I don't think I would be able to emotionally recover. But after the show introduces us to the sweetest character it has to offer, it then has to hit us with the most tragic one. And that is none other than Junpei, which will be what this next arc focuses on. I find it really interesting to split up Yuji with the main cast so early on. In fact, they don't even get a subplot. The most we see of them is maybe a Jujutsu sample. It's a bold move, but in my opinion it definitely pays off, as the development Yuji gets in these episodes is crucial moving forward. Before we get to that, let's get back to Junpei. We immediately see him getting bullied by his peers while a teacher just watches, doing nothing. So yeah, typical high school. We then see him watching a movie and the same guys are being dickheads in the theater. Turns out one of the curses from the Goon Squad is also there, and his name is Mahito. Him being rightfully fed up, proceeds to just fucking murder them, which honestly, I can't blame him for. They were fucking annoying. Junpei witnesses all this and runs after him. He catches up with him and says he wants to learn his ways. And while Mahito is teaching Junpei the ways of killing people, two sorcerers are sent in to investigate, and they are none other than Yuji and Nanami, who is also another favorite of mine from the show. The simplified version of his backstory is that he was a Jujutsu sorcerer, then quit because he thought it was shit. He then became a salaryman, but thought it was even more shit, so he went back to being a sorcerer. Essentially, he just thinks life is shit in general, and not gonna lie, I feel it, bro. He's relatable in the same way Squidward is. They both go through the dumbass shit life throws at you, although one does take it much better than the other. There are obviously other reasons why I like him, such as his badass ability basically granting him crits if he hits the right spot, and also him looking suspiciously like a certain British artist. Is it just me, or are Japanese people obsessed with David Bowie? Not that I can blame them, I love him too. The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and Spiders from Mars is his best album. Okay, quick edit. After doing some Google searches, I couldn't actually find anything saying he was based off David Bowie, so it's all probably just a coincidence. Ah well. Anyway, they snip out the scent of Mahito and start following it, but encounter some curses along the way. This is where we get both to see Nanami in action and Yuji's new ability, which delays the impact of curse energy a little after he lands a punch, basically hitting the enemy with a little double whammy. While this is happening, Mahito is in the middle of, grooming Junpei? Yeah, this guy is basically like the EDP curse. He's a curse that was created because of people hating each other, so yeah, basically a manifestation of everyone shitting on EDP. We also learn that he can change a person's soul, basically shaping them into hideous beings, and sometimes they're still alive. So yeah, only fun thoughts in this anime. This anime does juggle a lot of different themes, but it all works very well. It's badass, it's funny, and sometimes it can get a little creepy too, but none of them ever overpower the other. But before we delve further into that, we get a flashback to Junpei running a movie club, and it turns out he's a big nerd geeking out about movies and shit. But it's too bad he goes to a school with a bunch of Yakuza NPCs that if you look at them a little funny, they'll beat the shit out of you, because he then gets the shit beat out of him, and his club gets kicked out. At this point, I was really starting to see how the conversation between Yuji and Fushiguro back in the detention center was coming into the equation, because I think Junpei adds another viewpoint to their argument. Yuji, as we know, believes in saving everyone. From his viewpoint, he sees everyone as deserving of salvation. Fushiguro will have a better understanding later, but for now we can say that he's in the middle. He believes in salvation, but only for those he deemed as good people. We can also assume that he believes in judgment for those who are bad. Junpei is the complete opposite of Yuji. He is surrounded by negativity and hatred that he doesn't really see a need for saving anyone. Instead, he believes in punishment for those who have wronged him to a severe degree, which is why he's able to be coerced by Mahito. I'm enjoying the moral ambiguity of the show. I don't think any of these characters' ideologies are presented to be the correct one, and all three get theirs tested throughout the show. But anyway, they later get two leads, one showing that Junpei was there at the time of the murder, and the other most likely a trap leading to Mahito. So Yuji and Glasses Guy go for Junpei, while Nanami goes and faces Mahito. Let's start with Nanami versus Mahito, and this was actually one of the first fights that both combatants were all around equal, so there was so much more stakes in this one than the others. Once again, the animation was clean and smooth as hell, and the battle itself was also really interesting. Nanami's technique requires him to hit a perfect 7-3 ratio on his opponent's body, but when your opponent is constantly changing shape, it gets a bit tricky. Mahito also has a bunch of humans in his pocket that he can use like Pikmin to attack. The fight seems to be in Mahito's favor, but it turns out that Nanami gains more power when he's working overtime, which of course is hella relatable. The fight ends with Nanami sustaining injuries but manages to cut Mahito's leg before crushing him with a fuck ton of rubble. But like an unsuccessfully aborted fetus, Mahito squirms out of the rubble. I like to personally think that Nanami could have easily fought for longer, but couldn't be bothered and wanted to get off the clock. During the fight, Yuji and Glasses Man were busy trying to interrogate Junpei, but the plan didn't go down how they wanted it to. Junpei, unaware of his stalkers, runs into the teacher from before. And this guy must have fucking brain damage because somehow he thinks that Junpei was friends with the students who were killed and asks him why he wasn't at their funeral. Yes, because this is what friends do. Well anyway, before Junpei can smack the shit out of Nikocado Avocado here, Yuji drives him away and they're left alone to talk. The interrogation ends very shortly, concluding that Junpei isn't an evil sorcerer, and instead the conversation ends up drifting into movies. They end up becoming pals because of it, which is some really nice setup and payoff for the movie training by the author. But before they can get any further, Junpei's mom happens to be walking by and invites Yuji for dinner. During the dinner they get all chummy with one another having a blast, but Junpei, being informed by Mahito, knows Yuji is a sorcerer and asks him if he has killed anyone and what he would do if he needed to. A little out there of a question, but we can just ignore that because Yuji's answer does dive into his thought process. Although he doesn't outright say that he will or won't, he simply says that he wouldn't like to. Junpei obviously being a little confused that they most likely would be bad people he's killing, but Yuji thinks that his killing would make the value of life ambiguous and it scares him if his moral code is broken, and what the life of his friends mean. Now, I think the title of this episode being narrow-minded adds a lot to both Yuji and Junpei. Once again, while Yuji seems noble in this goal, it ultimately is a narrow-minded view on his job as a Jujutsu sorcerer. He may have the physical strength to be a sorcerer, but his mindset at this point in the show limits him from doing what's necessary. And of course, we've already said that this is the polar opposite of what Junpei believes in. However, the thought of tainting his soul and having to face his mother starts to drive him away from the idea of killing. And speaking of his mom, look man, I gotta say it. Why is mom kinda bad though? Like, god damn. Bro, why the fuck these kids bullying him so much? If I was in his school, I'd be his #1 homies for life, best defender. If we get to go home and see that. Well, with that out of the way, then his mom gets fucking ripped in half. Turns out someone planted a Sukuna finger next to her and a curse came and got her. Mahito convinces Junpei that someone planted it. This then causes Junpei to go on his villain arc and terrorize his school. Nanami gets fooled by Mahito and goes to the wrong place, but Yuji is able to make it to school in time. And thus the fight between Yuji and Junpei begins. It's a short but emotional fight, as the show at this point has built both their ideologies extremely well. We understand both sides and where they're coming from, but the fight ends with Yuji taking a blow that should kill him, but because of Sukuna's powers, it doesn't. But instead of continuing the fight, Yuji sits down and actually asks Junpei what's going on, and that's when Junpei tells him everything. This is when Yuji tells Junpei to come to Jujutsu High. And you think it just has to be this way, it makes perfect sense. Even in the opening with the cast growing in each episode, Junpei is always there, smiling with Yuji. But this show knows how to subvert expectations, unlike something else I know. Because Mahito shows up behind him, and before Yuji can even do anything, he turns Junpei into a freakish monster. Not gonna lie, this one hit hard for me the first time I watched it, and just as much a second. And the fact that he was still alive after was just fucking brutal. But Yuji ends up begging Sukuna to save him, but Sukuna refuses and ends up just laughing at him, to which Mahito joins in. So after witnessing his best friend die in front of him and left to be laughed at, Yuji goes on his rage arc and vows to kill Mahito. It's a common trope among shonen, but I think it fits the story very well. We just got done establishing that Yuji breaking his code and being forced to kill someone was something being set up, and this is beautiful payoff for it. But this statement by Yuji immediately leads into his fight with Mahito. I did say the animation wouldn't be a main focus of this video, but with this fight in particular, I think it does a great job of displaying personality through their fighting. Mahito's sadistic and playful personality is perfectly reflected through his constant shapeshifting and varied attacks. Yuji on the other hand is fueled with rage and attacks show it, yet he's careless, causing him to sustain many acupuncture wounds. And this carelessness also leads him to get touched by Mahito, allowing him to get transformed. However, Mahito's ability touches the soul of the body he's transforming, but with Yuji, there are two souls in there, and Sukuna really doesn't like being touched inappropriately. So he simply tells him to fuck around and find out before the fight resumes. This is why I love the wildcard characters such as Sukuna. He doesn't like Yuji, but he has to use his body to get what he wants, which we know has something to do with Hashiro. On the other hand, he doesn't care at all for the Goon Squad. He's the perfect wildcard and adds so much to the story. But anyway, before Yuji is turned into a fucking SpongeBob with all the holes he has in him, Nanami shows up and assesses the situation. Mahito immediately distracts Yuji by throwing some humans at him, but after going through his little character development, Yuji dispatches them and gets back in the fight. Although Jujutsu techniques are heavily varied, the show does a good job of giving evident weaknesses. With Mahito, they are able to see that he amps up his cursed energy just before transforming, thus hitting him before he can transform. So Yuji and Nanami start wailing on Mahito, treating him like a ragdoll, but this inspires Mahito to say, "It's domaining time!" and then spashes all over Nanami, leaving Yuji inside of the zone. Not gonna lie, when Nanami explained that the expansion guaranteed a hit, which meant he was essentially in the palm of Mahito, I thought it was done for. Especially after the flashback about how his striving for materialistic gain in a capitalistic society caused him to lose meaning and a sense of purpose in life and thus ultimately went back to sorcery because it would benefit the most people. I was like, damn, he definitely dead. But just like Ziggy Stardust coming down from space to give the people on Earth rock and roll, Yuji crashes through the domain and enters with Nanami. Okay, if any of you understood that reference, I will personally mail you a cookie. However, as we just established that Mahito's domain expansion is essentially one big palm, and when Yuji entered the domain, he was being touched by Mahito, and in turn, touching Sukuna as well. Thus, Sukuna says that you fucked around, now find out, and delivers a clean blow to Mahito, to which Yuji follows up on. Before they can exorcise Mahito, Yuji succumbs to the symptoms of bloodlust and passes out. Nanami chooses to save Yuji, leaving Mahito to get away. When Yuji wakes up, we get to talk about morality, This time what it means to have a proper death and how Yuji wishes to at least give everyone the chance to have one. I haven't talked about this one yet, but essentially boils down to the same thing as the rest of Yuji's beliefs. It's a really tall order, and one that may be too ambitious for his own good, but even Nanami knows that Yuji will still try his best to see it through. After that, we see that this entire arc was just one big anti-bullying ad, and it's on to the exchange event. Before we get into this next part, I think a lot of you are wondering why I haven't talked about a certain someone. And since I don't know where else I can fit this in, I'm just going to use my time now to talk about the main villain, Geto. Now, what do I think of him? And honestly, I don't have an opinion yet. Out of all the setups that this first season delivers, Geto is simultaneously the biggest one, but also the one we get so little info on. We know he used to be associated with Jujutsu High, but for some reason wants the cursor to take over the world. And he isn't a major player in the story, he mainly just lurks around all mischievous and shit. I do find him to be an interesting character, but I don't have enough to really make up my mind. It won't be until season 2 where his character definitely becomes a major player. With that out of the way, as the exchange event is coming up, Gojo thinks it's the perfect time to bring Yuji back from the dead. So they plot the greatest comeback since Jesus, but it didn't have the effect they were hoping for. But deep down, you know the other two still cared. But before that happened, we got to meet the rest of the Kyoto gang. We got Blood Guy, Robot Guy, Broom Lady, and their teacher Utahime, who really hates Gojo. And they also pay no attention to Yuji except for the principal, who really doesn't like that Yuji is back. So we get told that the first game of the event is a scavenger hunt for a second grade curse. Whichever team exercises it first wins. But the Kyoto gang ain't really about that life. Instead, all they want to do is kill Yuji, or at least told to do so. You might think this is just to give artificial stakes to this event, as if no one is at risk of losing anything, then what's the point? But you would be wrong, as this ultimately changes the entire event. It's filled with multiple conflicting interests that go against each other, which makes the entire arc a lot more complex. Speaking of conflicting interests, the elephant in the room is obviously Todo, as he doesn't like to be ordered around and his motivations aren't exactly clear. This makes for another wildcard character, as it's anyone's guess as to what he plans to do. And to add even more flavor, Gojo suspects there's a spy in Jujutsu High. God damn, those fucking bars. So with all the cards laid out on the table, the exchange event kicks off with Yuji delivering a beautiful flying knee to Todo while the rest disperse. Yuji was originally intended to just be a distraction and just last as long as he could against Todo, but it wasn't looking good. However, Yuji had the ultimate trump card, and that is none other than the power of friendship. Because when Todo asks him what his type of woman is, he responds with a tall girl with a big ass. The exact same type as Todo. This causes him to become schizophrenic and see Yuji as a brother that he's known for a long time, thus making them, as he puts it, best of friends. But before they can get any more time together, the rest of the Kyoto gang show up and try to kill Yuji. But now seeing Yuji for who he truly is, Todo stops them and tells them to fuck off. Which they do, not before the Tokyo gang catch on to what they're doing and meet them. And while Yuji and Todo are busy training together and becoming pals, it's the fight we've been waiting for, baby. Team Tokyo versus Team Kyoto. Now there's a lot of fights, so I'll briefly talk about each one. Anyway, let's go one by one, starting with... In what other anime can you say has a sentient panda box a mech and immediately afterwards have a philosophical discussion about their existence? Honestly, that's part of why Jujutsu Kaisen is so good. It can have really fun and expressive characters without losing any of its emotional heart. In such a short time, it's able to flesh out a character we practically just met in Mechamaru, and fleshes out Panda, all while still keeping the tempo of the fight engaging. There's not really much else to say except that it's a super solid fight. So with that one out of the way, let's move on to... If Miwa wasn't any more likable, turns out she's also broke and needs to help feed her brothers. Look man, I already know y'all are calling me a simp, and you know what? I do not care. Call me a simp all you want because I know y'all think she's adorable too. But yeah, she gets absolutely bodied by Maki, even getting disarmed and put to sleep on the phone by Balls Guy. Man, why they gotta disrespect homegirl like that, bro? What'd she do to deserve this? Oh well, next fight. A sadistic hammer-wielding girl fighting another girl riding on a broomstick while talking about feminism was not something on my bingo card. But the weirdest part is that it all works surprisingly well. I think the main reason why is the duality of Kukasaki's character. Nishiyama believes that women in the Jujutsu world are forced to meet both the standards of being strong and attractive, but to Kukusaki, all that is bullshit. She doesn't care about anyone else's expectations. She embraces her feminine side while also kicking ass simply because that's who she wants to be. And the fight itself is nice with Kukusaki at the end pulling out the squeaky hammer for the ultimate disrespect, but not able to finish it as she is sniped by Mai. Which brings us perfectly to our next fight.
You were my brother, Anakin! I loved you!
Now this is the fight we've been waiting for. It definitely got the most emotional build-up as we've seen the tension between the two sisters, but we just never knew why. And like with every other fight, Jujutsu Kaisen does not disappoint. You cannot tell me there wasn't a deliberate choice to have Mai fight using a long-range weapon and Maki fight with a short-range weapon, not only because it would provide an interesting dynamic in the fight, but also to highlight the differences between the two. At the climax of the fight, Mai fires her 6th shot, leading Maki to believe she was out. However, that's all part of Mai's plan. She literally uses the revolver to fool people into thinking she only has 6 shots, but she can create a 7th shot using cursed energy. Now, I'm assuming that this ability takes a lot of cursed energy and time to use because being a freedom-loving American, I would think it would be much more effective to use an assault rifle and just have infinite ammo. Then again, it would be hard to get your hands on an assault rifle in Japan. But that's irrelevant, as it's also revealed that in exchange for being born with no cursed powers, Maki was granted superhuman strength. Thus, she's able to catch the bullet and incapacitate Mai. It's here we finally get to see what the Zanin clan is all about. Essentially, it's an elite family of Jujutsu sorcerers in which if you don't have Jujutsu powers, you're basically seen as lesser and relegated to being nothing more than a servant. Maki was pissed at the fact that she was forced to be a servant and left the clan in order to become a sorcerer. Mai, however, never wanted to become a sorcerer and was only pushed to by the clan after Maki leaving. Thus, Mai attributed Maki leaving as her abandoning Mai, and she wanted them to stay at the bottom, but Maki never wanted that. I think this fight did a great job, and in my opinion, a better job than the last fight at injecting feminist social commentary through show and tell. And hell, maybe it was the setup of the previous fight that made this one's messaging work so well. But it just does a great job of showing how women are restrained for not being good enough. And once again, to pull something like that off in a show where a sentient panda fights a droid straight out of Star Wars is one hell of an achievement. In fact, the female characters in this show have been nothing short of perfection. They kick ass but aren't Mary Sue's. They're feminine without being sexualized. And just about any criticism you could have of female characters in media just does not apply to the girls in Jujutsu Kaisen. Well anyway, now that the ladies have had their turn, let's get back to the boys.
I say whoever threw that paper, your mom's a hoe.
After a streak of great fights, we get one that's kind of underwhelming. It's not entirely its fault as it does get interrupted midway, but there really wasn't much going on in the first place. We do get some insight into Kamo being part of another elite family, except his mom was a prostitute, so there was some family drama there. But I honestly couldn't bring myself to care much. Maybe it's because we've been introduced to so many backstories that by the time we got to Kamo, I didn't have much energy to keep it up. But the real elephant in the room is Fushiguro. Look, I know that the next arc, if you could call it that, will have Fushiguro doing some cool shit, but at this point, he still feels dry, and I still find him pretty boring. He doesn't really get much screen time, and hell, maybe the movie is all I need. But we're not talking about the movie, so that's irrelevant. But during their little scuffle, Rice Balls guy gets attacked by the tree guy that saved Volcano guy from earlier. I should probably start learning their names, shouldn't I? Turns out this tree guy really likes nature and thinks humans are destroying the world and shit, so he's basically an extreme climate change activist. During this, the baddies put a veil that only prevents Gojo from going in there, so Utahime and the principal go in to be greeted by a fucking Skyrim NPC. The principal then takes out a fucking electric tar, like damn, I didn't know this old man could rock like that. Well, while that is happening, the rest of the students are trying their best to fight the tree guy, but it's not really working. Fushiguro even gets some piranha plants stuck in him. But before the tree guy can actually kill anyone, Yuji and Todo pull up in the most stylish way possible. Now this is the fight we've all been waiting for, besides the other fights we were waiting for. But this one is unique as it's an actual threat and a huge test for Yuji. Todo seems to think so as he says he wouldn't enter the fight unless Yuji is able to land a black flash. Still coming off the fight with Mahito, Yuji is filled with rage and lets his emotions get in the way. In response, Todo bitch slaps him and tells him to get his head straight. With this fresh in his mind, Yuji locks in and lands a black flash, which is a super cool looking move. This show in my opinion is nailing Yuji's development strengths wise. They establish him as being a great hand-to-hand combatant, so they gave him abilities that build off that. I also think it would be weird if he just suddenly pulled off something like a Kamehameha, because it just doesn't feel like it would fit with his fighting style. But after seeing him land a black flash, Todo decides it's time to jump in. And we even get a little flashback to his past, where we learn that he got the thing about what woman is your type from another woman. So if any of you thought it was sexist, then take that, I guess. Well, anyway, after the fight gets going, Todo begins to use his technique, which allows him to swap places with another person. Then it's two other people. Then it's with inanimate objects. Now, if any of you think that it's dumb that his ability progressively applies to more and more things, then I'm sorry, but you're just wrong. It keeps the fight engaging and adds so many layers to the already incredible fight. And there is a distance limitation, as he can't just summon Gojo in here to mop the floor with Tree Guy. But I think it's also poetic that even though everyone hates Todo, his ability works best with a partner. So maybe he was just looking for a brother all along. And of course the chemistry between the two is just really good. All around, this fight has so much to offer, with Todo having dreams and apparently having an IQ of 53,000, to Yuji landing 3 consecutive black flashes, with the max ever done being 4 by Nanami, to just the usual Mappa animation. This fight just has it all, and me describing it will never do it justice. And if you've never seen it, then what the fuck are you doing here? Go watch the show! But with that out of the way, before Tree Guy can do his super awesome powerful move, Gojo breaks the veil. First thing he does, he absolutely folds the Skyrim NPC, and then hits Tree Guy with Purple Guy's balls. But unfortunately for Jutsu High, Tree Guy got away, and Mahito snuck in and stole all the fingers they'd gotten at that point. I do think it's a little annoying that for every fight the baddies have gone into, we haven't gotten many conclusive victories in this season yet. For the most part, the fights in this season are meant to set up rematches that will hopefully give us the actual conclusion. But you see, during the event, it turns out Tree Guy killed all the curses, so there was no winner of the event. Even though some people died, they decided they should continue on to the next event. However, instead of the usual individual battles, Gojo does a little trolling and the next event will be baseball, America's favorite pastime. Let's go, it's all about the Mets, baby, let's go Mets! Shit, how old is that fucking video? Ah, shit!
I'm on a whole nother level, I'm geeky.
Look, a lot of people will complain, it's just a filler episode, and yeah, you're right, but filler episodes by themselves are not bad. To me, I see them as tests, because if you truly have interesting characters, then having them do something like playing baseball should be a goldmine for entertainment. And Jujutsu Kaisen passes this with flying colors, because this is unironically one of the best episodes in the entire season. It's filled to the brim with so many fun moments with the cast as they bicker and banter between each other. This filler episode is definitely on par with something like the driving episode from Dragon Ball Z. Filler episodes can also just bring life to these characters as we get to see them not under the threat of being brutally murdered. But in my opinion, I think the character introductions in this episode is more than enough for that. First impression of EAK ramen. I shit a lot the next day. Yuji. The mango she was letting ripen in the refrigerator is gone. Miwa. Hated mangoes, but got over it recently. Mai. And my personal favorite. Wants to punch a zebra one day. Panda. But with the fun out of the way, it's back to business. This time they got a report of 3 people who had their auto-locking doors break before getting stabbed to death. Which for London standards would be an average Tuesday, mate. But for Japan, that's a little suspicious. So they looked for some sort of lead and it turns out all 3 of them went to the same middle school. It also turns out that Fushiguro went to that school as well, and was an absolute menace. I mean, he was just stacking bodies on top of bodies there. Well, it turns out there was a crazy TikTok challenge going around the school where a bunch of students would bungee jump off a bridge that is also known as a popular suicide spot. So yeah, pretty realistic. With a little bit more digging, we found out that Sumiki, Fushiguro's sister, and the girl we saw earlier also participated. However, she's already cursed and in a coma, so they have no way of knowing when she's gonna die. Finally, Fushiguro is getting some sort of attention. I'm glad they're exploring his trauma as an explanation to why he is so cold. He really did start to grow on me on this little arc. Fushiguro, wanting to exercise the curse as soon as possible, goes alone, but Yuji and Kugasaki are of course real ones and follow him anyway. So they enter into the cursed domain, but there is an unexpected visitor. Turns out Mahito has been feeding cursed objects to random dudes and creating even more abominations. So as soon as the fight gets going, Kugasaki gets pulled out by another guy, to which Yuji and Mahito's goon follow, thus leaving Fushiguro to deal with the curse of the bridge. So Fushiguro ends up winning whack-a-mole, but turns out there's another Sukuna finger here, and the same curse from the detention center is back. Apparently when Yuji ate the finger, it activated all the other fingers including the one threatening Sumiki. You can already see that this fight is going to be a great way to show growth, by having a rematch with something that was essentially a death sentence at the beginning of the show. But it doesn't go well as Fushiguro gets battered up pretty bad. But then, Fishiguro pulls out his ultimate move, the flashback. In this one, we get to see Gojo training with Fishiguro and giving him advice. We've clearly established that Fishiguro has been basically a background character up until now, and the show just straight up acknowledges it, even using the baseball episode as evidence, as instead of going for a home run, he hits a sacrificial bunt. See, the baseball episode wasn't entirely filler. But for how cold Fishiguro is to everyone, he ironically is too much of a team player and needs to be a bit more self-absorbed as a fighter. It's actually realistic, as most fighters in the real world do have this "I'm the best" mentality that makes them so great. So a lot of the complaints I've had of Fishigiro's character turned out to be all part of his character development. Well, after the flashback is done, he goes fucking mental. Kinda like his Mad Dog awakening, he just starts not giving a fuck and just attempts a domain expansion, but it ends up being incomplete. Even with that, he's able to make a fool of the finger curse and then passes out. Then we get the full backstory of Fishiguro. Like we said before, he was a menace in middle school, but he also had a strong sense of justice. Basically, his mentality was, bad people are bad because they're bad, and good people are also bad because they forgive bad people. So yeah, there's not much winning with him. We also learned that his father was a part of the Zenin clan and hooked up with Sumiki's mother before dipping and becoming a deadbeat. Apparently he tried selling Fishiguro back to the clan, but Gojo stopped it and instead had him go to Jujutsu High instead. Or at least I think that's what happened. I don't know, it was kinda hard to focus when Gojo looked like this. But that's Fishiguro for you. I can't say that he fully won me over, but it got pretty damn close. And hell, maybe the movie is a thing to push me over, but that's neither here nor there. But with that, I think that was a perfect wrap up for his arc for the season. He grew both strength-wise and mentally, and while it was kinda thrown at you very bluntly, we finally learned his backstory. But we still have one final fight. When Kugisaki was pulled out of the place, god fucking damn it! When Kugisaki was dragged out of the domain, she was met with another one of Mahito's descendants. You can immediately tell because he acts like a predator. Turns out he and his brother were sent here to get the finger. The predator doesn't really want to kill anyone, but apparently has a little bad spot on his back. So if anyone sees that, then they're gonna have to die. To which Yuji and Lil Bro immediately appear behind him. He gets a little grumpy and thus the fight begins. These two brothers' main ability is to squirt out poisonous blood that once it hits you, you're dead within a few minutes. I also forgot to mention that explaining your technique in Jujutsu Kaisen actually makes it more effective. It's a fun workaround to allowing characters to explain their technique without them looking like a fucking dumbass. Thankfully for Yuji, Kugisaki is not playing around, as she stabs herself with her nails. Turns out she can use the blood in her voodoo ability, thus she's able to link her pain with theirs. And Yuji is also able to move as Sukuna allows him to be immune to poison. So as Yuji wails on Lil Bro, Kugisaki's playing chicken with Big Bro. And this is where we see that Kugisaki is one crazy ass bitch. She's got some sort of masochistic kink because she has definitely enjoyed this way too much. But I love crazy characters, and the last two characters have already given us two in the main cast. Maybe it's because I'm also on the brink of insanity too, so oh my god, literally me guys, literally me! Anyway, after his brother gets beat up a little too much, Big Bro releases the poisoner too, but it's no use as Noboru hits his little bro with a Mortal Kombat style fatality. This causes Big Bro to try and run away, but not before Kugisaki uses his severed arm for a voodoo technique and Yuji finishes him off. Overall, a spectacular fight. Everything from the animation, the character development for Yuji and Kugisaki, and even the banger soundtrack is all stunning. In fact, the soundtrack throughout the show has been great, from badass hip-hop beats to more whimsical stuff to even creepy and disturbing. The soundtrack is able to bounce around from these different styles to perfectly capture the tone of each scene. But finally, after it's all said and done, Fishiguro tells Kugisaki not to tell Yuji that eating the finger indirectly kills those people. However, Sukuna is already yapping all about it, to which Yuji tells him not to tell Fishiguro that, because we get a flashback to when Fishiguro was asking Yuji what if the person Yuji saves ends up killing another, all while not realizing that the person he just saved being Yuji had ended up killing others. Such a unique twist on what we thought we knew about the two characters. Final few things of note is that both Toto and this white-haired chick I forgot the name of recommended the cast of first grade. Then cut to a cool shot of our main three, and it seems there's much more that the show has to offer. So after way too fucking long, we finally made it through Jujutsu Kaisen Season 1. So, final thoughts. Well, I think it's pretty obvious that I enjoyed my time. Is it the most groundbreaking or innovative show out there? No, but it obviously never tried to be. But what it does do is shake up the shonen formula to not only improve it, but also give a unique spin on it. There are obvious shonen archetypes present in this show, but they're all given the tweaks they need to stand out and shine above a sea of similarity. I don't like to call things peak because that implies that things can't get any better, but it kind of works in this case. Jujutsu Kaisen to me represents the peak of what shonen can be on its own. In order to get better than it, you're going to have to do something truly special and unique. But overall, I just had a really good time, and I hope you all enjoyed this video as well, so please like and subscribe. If this video does well, I'll take a look at season 2. It should be fun as it will be my first time watching and hopefully it won't be as long. I promise, I'm not like this usually. I swear.